There is a language spoken today by fewer than 4 million people. It is not related to Russian, not to Turkish, not to Persian, Arabic, Armenian, or any Indo-European tongue that has ever mapped itself across the ancient world. Linguists have spent generations hunting for its family, its cousin, its ancestor, its nearest neighbor on the great tree of human speech, and they have found nothing. It stands entirely alone. The people who speak it have been squeezed between the world's great empires for 3,000 years. Those empires left poetry, architecture, religion, even vocabulary. But the language itself remained sealed, untouched, an orphan that refused adoption. And then the DNA laboratories arrived. Scientists expected to find what they always find in crossroads civilizations, a mosaic, a palimpsest of conquests, each layer written over the last. What they found instead was not the story of a people who survived conquerors. It was the story of a people who existed before the conquerors' ancestors were a coherent population at all, which raises a question that the data has so far refused to close. What if the people we call Georgians were never simply a mountain civilization at the edge of empire? What if they are something far older and far more consequential than anyone thought to ask? The standard account of Georgian origins is one of the most compelling narratives in the ancient world, and it earns its telling. The Georgians are the indigenous people of the South Caucasus, a civilization so old that Greek sailors wrote about them, called their land Colchis, and sent mythological heroes, Jason and the Argonauts, to steal their treasures. Georgian tradition traces ancestry to Kartlos, grandson of the biblical Japhet, son of Noah, a founding myth that places the Georgian people at the very beginning of recorded human time. By the early 4th century AD, somewhere between 326 and 337, Georgia adopted Christianity as its state religion. This was not a late conversion. Rome itself would not formally follow for another half-century. The Georgian Orthodox Church, which still anchors national identity today, is among the oldest continuously operating Christian institutions on earth. The historical record reads like a chronicle of endurance. The Persians came. The Romans came, the Byzantines came, the Arabs swept through in the 7th century, the Mongols arrived in the 13th, not once but multiple times. The Ottomans pressed from the west, the Safavid Persians from the south, the Russians absorbed what remained in 1801, and through all of it, Georgia endured, battered, partitioned, reduced, but never fully dissolved. Its language remained, its church remained, its people remained. The genetic expectation given this history was entirely reasonable. A people so thoroughly marinated in conquest should carry a complex admixture profile. Persian ancestry from the south, Mongol signatures from the east, Slavic drift from the north, Turkic components mixed through centuries of Ottoman contact. Scientists expected, in the language of population genetics, which treats DNA the way an archaeologist treats sediment, reading layers of time in the body itself, a deep, complicated layer cake of empires. The conquerors came, the conquerors left, but the DNA barely moved. This is the part the records don't explain. In 2015, a research team including scientists from the University of Cambridge and the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology published a paper in Nature Communications that quietly rearranged the ancient human family tree. The study was titled, Upper Paleolithic Genomes Reveal Deep Roots of Modern Eurasians, and its lead authors included Epi Jones and colleagues. The raw material was not modern blood, it was ancient bone, specifically 2 sets of human remains extracted from cave burials in western Georgia. One came from Satserblia Cave, a site radiocarbon dated to approximately 13,300 years before the present. The other from Kotias Kled, dated to roughly 9,700 years ago. Both sites sit in the Imereti region of western Georgia, tucked between the Greater Caucasus Range and the Black Sea lowlands. What the analysis revealed was not a variant or a subclade, it was a branch, a distinct ancient lineage, what researchers now call Caucasus Hunter-Gatherers, or CHG, that had diverged from western hunter-gatherers approximately 45,000 years ago, shortly after anatomically modern humans first pushed into Europe from Africa. It had then diverged again from the ancestors of Neolithic farmers around 25,000 years ago, near the peak of the last glacial maximum, when most of Eurasia was entombed in ice. Not a minor variation, not a regional drift, a separate branch of the human story, sealed inside a mountain range while the rest of the continent froze and reformed. A haplogroup, in genetic terms, is like a surname carried not in a name, but in the body itself, a lineage marker passed from parent to child across thousands of generations, invisible to the eye, but readable by the laboratory. The CHG haplogroup signature is that surname, and when researchers applied landscape genetics modeling to modern Georgian populations, a method that maps living DNA against ancient terrain to trace movement and continuity, they found that modern Georgians carry this CHG ancestry at estimated levels of 40 to 60% of their autosomal genome. Autosomal DNA is the broad record, the full inheritance from both parents across all lineages, the most comprehensive snapshot of who a population actually is. The math does not match the story. The standard narrative places Georgians in the category of a complex, multiply layered Caucasian people. The DNA places a substantial portion of them in a lineage that predates the formation of most populations currently living in Eurasia. The first theory that scientists offer is straightforward, and it deserves to be taken seriously before it is questioned. The Caucasus Mountains functioned as what population geneticists call a glacial refugium, a biological fortress, a pocket of survivable terrain in a continent that was otherwise becoming uninhabitable. The last glacial maximum, which peaked roughly 26,000 years ago and did not fully release its grip until around 19,000 years ago, turned much of northern Eurasia into a frozen expanse where human survival was impossible. In those centuries, populations were forced into refugia, sheltered zones with enough warmth, water, and prey to sustain life. The Caucasus, buffered by the Black Sea's moderating currents and walled by mountain ranges that blocked the worst Arctic air from the north, was one of those zones. In landscape genetics, rugged terrain does something specific and measurable. It slows the movement of genes across space. New genetic signatures take a long time to form in mountain populations, and once established, they persist far longer than in open lowland corridors. A mountain range is not merely geography, it is, genetically speaking, a time capsule. The specific zone identified in this modeling, the Kolchak Refugium, centered near what is now Kutaisi, and the Rioni River Valley near the Black Sea coast, corresponds almost exactly to the region where CHG ancestry frequencies peak highest in modern kartvelian-speaking populations. The shelter that saved the lineage 20,000 years ago left a fingerprint that modern genomics can still read. This explanation carries genuine weight, and yet it has a limitation that the data itself exposes. Neighboring populations, Armenians to the south, Azerbaijanis to the east, several North Caucasus groups to the north, share the same mountain geography, the same general refugium zone, the same access to CHG ancestry. And yet Georgians carry CHG fractions at measurably higher levels than most of their neighbors. If geography alone were the mechanism, the distribution should be flatter, more evenly spread. Something else was maintaining a boundary, something the mountains alone cannot explain. The second theory is more complicated, and it requires a detour through linguistics. The kartvelian language family, comprising Georgian, Mingrelian, Svan, and Laz, is, in the formal terminology of modern linguistics, a complete isolate. No claimed genetic link between the kartvelian languages and any other language family in the world is accepted by mainstream linguistics. This is not a matter of debate awaiting resolution. It is the settled consensus, arrived at after generations of comparative linguistic analysis. Every other major language family on Earth connects to something. Indo-European languages share roots across a territory stretching from Ireland to northern India. Afro-Asiatic languages link Arabic to Amharic to ancient Akkadian. Turkic languages extend in an unbroken chain from Istanbul to Siberia. Kartvelian connects to nothing. It is linguistically orphaned, alone on the family tree of human speech in a way that few languages anywhere on the planet can claim. The theory proposes that this linguistic isolation functioned as what might be called an ethnic membrane. Language is not merely communication. It is a boundary condition for intimacy. Peoples who do not share a language marry each other less. They trade more cautiously, integrate more slowly, and preserve their genetic distinctiveness more thoroughly than populations connected by a common tongue. The Y chromosome data supports this. Haplogroup G2A, a paternal lineage strongly associated with ancient Caucasian populations, is found at consistently high frequencies in kartvelian-speaking groups, with the association between the paternal line and the linguistic group tracking together across centuries of recorded history. Among Svan-speaking males, a subgroup within the kartvelian family, researchers have found approximately 78% carrying haplogroup G2A, one of the highest single haplogroup concentrations documented anywhere in Eurasia for a non-island population. The language did not just survive. The language may have been the mechanism by which everything else survived. Adapted. And yet this theory too has a ceiling. Language barriers slow admixture. They do not stop it. The Roman Empire stationed garrisons in Georgian territory. The Mongols left administrators. The Ottomans governed western Georgia for centuries. Rulers intermarry. Armies leave descendants. The linguistic membrane was real, but permeable. Language alone cannot account for the near total genetic continuity the data reveals. Which leaves a third possibility. Here is where it gets complicated. The third, and the one most researchers are hesitant to say out loud, suggests that the story of the Georgians is not a story about a people receiving the world's influences. It is a story about a people who transmitted something irreplaceable into the world, long before anyone knew they had done it. Around 3000 BC, a group of pastoralists from the Pontic-Caspian steppe north of the Caucasus began one of the most consequential migrations in human history. Called the Yamnaya, they spread across Europe and into Central Asia with a speed and scale that archaeologists and geneticists are still struggling to fully account for. They reshaped the ancestral composition of populations from Britain to the subcontinent. They almost certainly carried the ancestral forms of the Indo-European languages that today are spoken by roughly half the people on Earth. The 2015 Nature Communications study found something that stopped the research community in its tracks. The Yamnaya owed approximately half their ancestry to the Caucasus Hunter-Gatherer lineage, to CHG, to the same distinct ancient clade that left its deepest surviving imprint in what is now Georgia. A previously unidentified strand of human ancestry, now called the fourth strand of Eurasian genomics, flowed from the Caucasus into the steppe population before the Yamnaya expansion began. Researchers are careful to frame this as probability, not certainty. The precise mechanism by which CHG ancestry entered the Yamnaya remains a matter of active investigation. But the signal is clear, and the data has not ruled out the following implication. If modern Georgians are the best preserved living descendants of CHG, and CHG shaped the Yamnaya, and the Yamnaya shaped Europe and South Asia, then a thread of ancestry traceable to the Caucasus Mountains runs through hundreds of millions of people who have never heard of Setserblia Cave and have no reason to think of Georgia as anything more than a small country at the edge of Europe. The data doesn't confirm this. It only fails to rule it out. Imagine you are standing at the mouth of Setserblia Cave in the winter of 13,300 years ago. The entrance is narrow, low, carved by water into pale limestone. The cold outside is not metaphorical, it is geological, the residual weight of an ice age only recently beginning to loosen its grip. Below you, the Caucasus lowlands catch the last gray light before dark. The Black Sea, just to the west, sends its moisture up the river valleys in faint currents of warmth that make this pocket livable when most of Europe is not. The smell inside is pine smoke and wet stone and the close warmth of bodies and fire. Outside, the wind moves across a landscape that will not fully thaw for another few thousand years. There is a man near the fire. He is young, probably no more than 30. He has lived his entire life within a short walk of this cave. He knows which slopes hold the most game in spring. He knows where the river bends and leaves the best crossing. He knows this valley the way only a person can know a place that has shaped every generation of their family for as long as memory can hold. He does not know the word haplogroup. He has no concept of a lineage marker, no idea that his body carries a signature that will eventually be extracted from his bones by researchers with tools that will not be invented for over 13,000 years. He does not know that his descendants will become the subject of a paper published in a journal called Nature Communications, or that linguists will one day puzzle over the language his great-great-grandchildren will speak, unable to find it any relative on Earth. He knows this valley. He knows these caves. And his descendants, generation after generation, across millennia of conquest and displacement and reorganization, will never fully leave. That same lineage is measurable today in a saliva swab taken from a Georgian farmer in the Imereti region, walking the same general landscape, speaking a language with no known relatives. A genomic thread, largely unbroken, across 13,000 years. Here is the reframe that changes everything. The story the world has told about Georgia is a story of siege, a small Christian nation caught between the grinding plates of great empires. Persians to the south, Mongols from the east, Ottomans from the west, Russians from the north. The narrative is one of a people perpetually occupied, perpetually reduced, perpetually surviving. Georgia is cast as the receiver of history's violences, the small country that absorbed everything and endured. The genomic data inverts this completely. Every empire that marched through Georgia reshaped its political borders, reshaped its rulers, reshaped the names of cities and the languages of official documents and the religion practiced in public. But it could not meaningfully reshape the gene pool. The conquerors came, the conquerors left, the DNA stayed. The 2023 study, published in Genome Biology and Evolution, led by Theodore Schur and colleagues at the University of Pennsylvania and Bryn Athyn College, sampled 485 individuals across 30 locations in western Georgia. The team analyzed mitochondrial DNA, Y chromosome data, and nearly 590,000 autosomal markers. What they found was a population that had emerged as a distinct genetic entity by at least the Bronze Age, and had been influenced but not replaced by every subsequent wave of migration and conquest. The Kura Araxes culture passed through. The Scythians came, the Greeks left colonies, the Persians administered, the Mongols devastated. All of them left traces. None of them left transformations. The signal of deep local ancestry overwhelmed the noise of empire across every metric the study could apply. One elder in the Georgian highlands has said something that researchers sometimes cite not as data, but as a way of understanding what the data means. We did not survive because we were strong. We survived because we were already old. The genomic record suggests this is not merely sentiment. It is, in its own way, precise. The thing that defined Georgia as small, its rugged isolation, its incomprehensible language, its mountain walls, was the exact mechanism that preserved something the rest of the world lost 10,000 years ago. The weakness was the vault. What the Georgian case reveals, widened to its full implication, is a principle that should unsettle the way we think about human history at its foundation. Political conquest and genetic replacement are not the same event. Empires can erase languages. They can erase religions, dynasties, names, borders, archives, and entire written traditions. What they cannot always erase is a gene pool, especially when geography and cultural identity combine to form a compound barrier that no army is equipped to dismantle. If one population in the South Caucasus, numbering fewer than 4 million people, can carry a lineage that is 13,000 years old and largely unbroken, and in carrying it, preserve the deepest surviving trace of an ancestry that once seeded half of Eurasia, then the populations we casually describe as mixed and modern may be carrying threads far older, far more intact, and far more consequential than any textbook of human migration has yet acknowledged. The archive of human ancestry is not closed. It is written in living bodies. And some of those bodies are walking around in a small country between the Black Sea and the Caucasus Mountains, speaking a language no one else on Earth has ever spoken. The Georgians were never who we thought. The DNA finally revealed the truth of what they were, and what they may have given to the rest of us, without either side knowing the transaction had occurred, is a question the science is only now learning how to ask. They were never who we thought, and perhaps, in ways we have not yet begun to measure, neither are we.